Right. So welcome everyone to the informational session for the Racial Equity Roundtable for Philanthropy Cohort. I am Fabra, my pronouns are she, her, and I am the primary facilitator of the Racial Equity Roundtables that are hosted by Forward Through Ferguson. So our agenda for today is that we just want to give a quick purpose and orientation about the history of the roundtable, and also talk to you about the offering that we're hoping to host later on this year that's particularly for folks who work within and lead the philanthropy sector. So this is our brief agenda. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit about our why. We'll also share a little bit about our racial equity capacity building opportunities in general. And then we'll give some more specific information about how to apply for the roundtable. We also have two former participants from previous roundtables that are here to share a little bit of testimonial about how the roundtable has assisted them in their work since participating. So welcome to them, and we'll bring them into the conversation in a moment. So for some more formal introductions, I think we've learned, throughout our racial equity capacity building activities that, the work is also very relational. So we always like to kind of start our sessions by coming into this space and sharing a little bit about ourselves. So I'll share a little bit about my story, and I'll also invite the other facilitators of our roundtable that we're hoping to provide to speak a little about themselves as well. So once again, I'm Fabra, and I lead our Build Racial Equity Capacity Strategy. Previously, before joining the staff at Forward Through Ferguson, I've worked in predominantly nonprofit sector, so education, K through 12, as well as higher ed, and helping three actually small nonprofit organizations with the social justice cause start up, and been on several founding boards. So I commend the people that are here who are funding and resourcing nonprofit organizations in the startup phase. I became really passionate about it, and through a partnership with some local organizations who were hoping to bring more racial equity training to the St. Louis area is how I, developed a close following for an appreciation for Forward Through Ferguson. And over the years, once more capacity was built for staffing, and I knew that they were interested in a racial equity catalyst, I was like, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. So I went out for the role, and I've been here for 2 years, which is awesome. It was amazing. I also am a former participant of the Racial Equity Roundtable. So the pilot version of the roundtable that started in, I want to say it was at the end of 2016, I actually participated on that first roundtable, and much credit to Dr. Kira Banks and Nicole Hudson, as well as David Dwight, who were the founding facilitators of the roundtable. I think it was really a helpful space, and a very supportive space for me as a practitioner at the time. So it's been a full circle journey to go from being a participant to also now being in leadership and on staff and helping guide others. And I'm happy to be here. I'm from St. Louis, and born and raised here, went to public school here, UCB School District. And yeah, I'm just a St. Louis girl and still trying to help be a catalyst for positive change. So I will pass it to Rachel, who can share more about her story.
You, Fabra, those 2 years flew by.
I know. Yep.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel D'Souza Siebert. I wear a couple different hats. I, with Forward Through Ferguson, serve as the Senior Director of Resource Development and Justice Philanthropy, and have been working with FTF on anti-racist fund development work since 2017. I also, in 2015, founded Gladiator Consulting, which is a boutique consultancy that works with mostly local grassroots and grass tops nonprofit organizations, essentially with capacity building across operationalizing equity and fund development and planning. I'm a St. Louis native. My parents immigrated to St. Louis from India in the 70s, and growing up, I had a very multicultural family. I had Jamaican aunties and French aunties, and our family celebrations were always a very multicultural affair. And so it was very bizarre for me to then also come up in Catholic schools in St. Louis, which were very, especially in the county, very white, and sort of tried to navigate my role in community, even as a child, knowing that St. Louis has a very Black-white dominant narrative. And so I have sort of always in school, in life, in my work, have wanted to be a bridge for folks, to bring people together, to have lots of different kinds of conversations. And so over the course of my time, my schooling, leaving for Chicago and coming back, really decided that spending my time and using my lived experience and wisdom in the nonprofit sector was a really great place for me. And essentially just trying to figure out how do we have, some growth and uncomfortable conversations when it comes to how the nonprofit sector is set up and where we reinforce things that don't work for all members of our community, and how we can start to imagine different ways of being, different ways of thinking about relationships and love and community in this work, because we're all trying to live a mission and vision for the work that we do. So that's a little bit about why I'm here. I also do this work because I have two beautiful, wonderful, multicultural children who deserve to have a different experience of St. Louis than I did. And so I also live into this work because I want them to have a different story when they are my age, and honestly, by the time they get to 2039. I will kick it to my colleague, Luke.
Thank you, Rachel. My name's Luke. I am a development catalyst at FTF. So I focus specifically on our individual giving efforts. I've been here for about 6 months. Prior to joining FTF, I lived in Chicago for 4 years. Background is in education and fundraising. And kind of always knew I was going to move back to my hometown. I'm from here. I grew up in Kirkwood. And kind of knew I'd move back at some point. And once I started learning about FTF and their vision for St. Louis, and particularly their approach to kind of realizing that vision, it made me really want to join the team, because what they want for St. Louis is what I want to see my hometown look like. So I feel lucky to be on the team and be part of that work. This will be my first roundtable experience, so I'm looking forward to that, to learning from Fabra and from you all as well. So yeah, I'm excited. I will kick it to Russell.
Hey everyone, my name is Russell Beckham. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm from Virginia, Springfield and Arlington, Virginia, right outside of DC. Moved to St. Louis about 5 years ago, and my background is in urban studies, just what I studied throughout my undergraduate. I really wanted to focus on institutionalized racism and the systems which uphold institutional racism within that, and I'm now a student at Brown at WashU, getting a master's in social work, and also continuing to look at ways to reinvest in communities, and really looking at those processes with racial equity and trauma-informed lens. And so I am a racial equity capacity building fellow within Ferguson. I started with them this past summer. And I'm super invested in a lot of the things that they look at with systems and policy reform. And I'm super excited to be here with you all. So passing it back to Fabra, and we'll kind of move forward from there.
Thank you, Russell. And also thank you, Luke and Rachel, for bringing yourselves into the space and for being here with me. in facilitation, not just of this info session, but just being my partner in really building out the vision for the philanthropy cohort. This is a really exciting opportunity. But before we get into how to apply, we'll just orient ourselves a little bit more to who we are as an organization. I don't want to make the assumption that everybody here is super familiar with the work that we do. So I'll just talk a little bit more about who we are and our bottom line. So as some of you may know, the work of Forward Through Ferguson began with the Ferguson Commission, the 16 community members spanning all sectors and belief systems who were brought together by the former governor after the killing of Mike Brown Jr. in Ferguson. So the commission took up the call to confront and engage with the community pain and the regional experiences of the Ferguson uprising that followed the killing of Mike Brown Jr. And it was important that the commission focused on not just what happened, but the underlying root causes. So treating the causes, not just the systems. So Forward Through Ferguson as an organization was born at the end of the commission out of a vocal community desire that the momentum continued to grow and to ensure that the report and the calls to action of the report didn't just, subside and collect dust, because St. Louis can be very good at making, awesome plans, groundbreaking plans, and then people don't do it, right? So we stayed together as an organization to make sure that this work happens. And so here's our mission: embracing the Ferguson Commission's mandate. We seek to center impacted communities and to mobilize accountable bodies to advance racially equitable systems and policies to ensure that all people in the St. Louis region can thrive. It's big work. So while we always like to begin with how racial inequities impact people of color, which is what we can clearly visibly see, we would also be remiss if we ignored the fact that racial inequity harms everyone, particularly in the St. Louis region. So economists at UMSL's Public Policy Research Center estimated in 2012 that St. Louis's regional GDP suffered by $13 billion. So we lost $13 billion by 2012 because of racialized income gaps. So our data team did this analysis again in 2016 and found out that the number has grown to over 17 billion lost due to racial equity or racial inequity and racial disparities. So think of the possibilities that are withheld and trapped in that $17 billion and all of the lived realities that it represents. And I would encourage everybody to imagine, what St. Louis could look like, what the region and the state could look like if these racialized outcomes in economic opportunity and resource no longer existed. And so what is racial equity? And I'd like to credit the commission as well as Dr. Kira Banks and Nicole Hudson and David Dwight, founding facilitators of this roundtable, who've really, I think, developed a succinct and highly comprehensive definition and vision for what it is. So racial equity is simply a state in which our life outcomes can't be predicted by race anymore. So when all of our systems and institutions, health, education, transportation, workforce development, all of the systems that give us resource and opportunity are working well for everyone, and our outcomes are excellent and random, that's how we know that we will have achieved racial equity. And we think about racial equity in particular because of the call of the Ferguson Commission, and also because of the idea that all of our identities intersect. And particularly the race construct is special because it interacts and gives resource or disadvantages to people in multiple ways in their identities. And so it could be said that if you address race, you also could address other issues of identity that create disparities and oppression in our society. So that's just like a little intellectualism, but I'm kind of good for that in a random conversation. But this is why we focus in particular on racial equity. For us, when we think about a path to racial equity, and you'll hear us mention this a lot, we are often talking about this model, which was developed to express the key elements of our theory of change. So as members of the St. Louis region, we're asking folks to be on a path to racial equity that requires focus on the individual, the institutional, and the regional levels. And that before we can transform the region towards equity, we have to move through the stages of awareness of inequities at each level. Then through processes of learning and unlearning, we deepen our understanding of why they exist. And then with that grounding, can take informed action to try things out for transformation. So each stage is crucial. And I find that often there's a temptation to jump to transformation or transformational practice, which because of the deeply entrenched and complex nature of systemic racism, but it often sets us up for unintentionally perpetuating inequities. So even when we move through them, we recognize that it might not exactly be linear, and we don't suggest that all of this is a linear process, but we offer this model particularly to give people a visual opportunity to conceptualize what steps along this path could look like. So I will pass it to Rachel to talk a little bit more about what is an additional vision that we offer to try to guide folks along this path.
Yep. So back in 2018, we released our STL 2039 action plan, which was essentially, a mini strategic plan for the organization to think about how we bring the work of the commission to life. And so there are 3 parts to the plan that we've been activating over the course of the last few years. Advocating for policy and systems change, building the racial equity capacity of the community, and then also figuring out how to organize resources, both human and financial capital, to sustain the work of Forward Through Ferguson, as well as the long-term efforts towards change in racial equity in the community. So it is our hope and dream that when we activate on those strategies, combined with having many people with a heart set for the longevity of this work, that we hope that by the year 2039, we have been able to create a more racially equitable St. Louis, which is also a single generation or 25 years after the murder of Mike Brown. So the racial equity roundtable model sort of fits into the build racial equity capacity piece of this work, though we learned through conversations and being in relationship with many of you that there was an opportunity for us to specifically focus on our colleagues in the philanthropy space. So we really do have the goal of sort of cultivating and activating building racial equity capacity with these folks, as well as giving your organizations the opportunity both to think about what long-term change and shifting mindset looks like, as well as a way to measure progress and talk about success, not just internally, but with your peers and across the community. And I will kick it to Luke to share a little bit more about our philosophy around the work.
Great. So as Faber mentioned a little bit at the top there, we kind of exist as a systems change, social policy impact organization to sort of catalyze, bring about the change that we're seeking in terms of the racial inequities in the region. So the offerings that we provide within that build racial equity capacity bucket help to bring people together for community and capacity building. And we're not necessarily in the business of diversity training. So we're not a replacement for or competitors with organizations like NCCJ or Crossroads, places like that. Our goal is to kind of help build the muscle of individuals and institutions in the region for activating around calls to action for racial equity. So in practice, this means serving as infrastructure builders and wayfinders, which is a term that we use, helping organizations and sectors to kind of assess where they are on that path to racial equity that Fabra showed you earlier. Establishing where you're at currently, building plans for movement toward understanding so that we can kind of move collectively toward the transformational work at the end there. I think we can go to the next slide. So again, we serve as a wayfinder. We're established to kind of carry on the community insights and vision from the Ferguson Commission process. which identified the need for kind of defining that path to racial equity, and then to help move the region from an awareness of inequities to an understanding to eventual transformation. So again, we serve as wayfinders on that path. I will kick it to Fabra and Russell.
Yeah, so part of that wayfinding is offering some opportunities for folks in the region to build bridges between now and their visions for racial equity. So today we'll focus specifically on the racial equity roundtable opportunity for folks in the philanthropy sector. But to see a complete overview of our offerings, I think Russell is adding in the chat the link for the Philanthropy Roundtable Cohort, and also our link for our general RECB website that lists descriptions of all of our workshops and other opportunities. So let's get into what we'll experience on the roundtable. So it's approximately a 9-month commitment. The 4 major components of the roundtable are case study creation. So each participating organization will complete a guided case study, particularly on aspects of racial equity indicators in practice, to examine your organizational history, current landscape, and strengths and challenges in the work that you're doing in your practice in the field of philanthropy. There will also be resource generation. So in addition to the case studies, what we do as the facilitators is curate readings, frameworks, toolkits, different sorts of assessments that you could utilize to think about and to leverage as you are building out visions and action plans for your work. We also facilitate intergroup dialogue. So there are discussions at each session where there are guided discussion questions on racial equity topics, and also racial equity topics as they directly relate to the work in philanthropy. So this is a tailored engagement, and the cross sector one, just for in case there are folks who happen to, after this session, be interested in the cross sector one, that one is for more general, like organizational leadership and development, but these tailored questions will be more so in the practice of the field of philanthropy. And also occasionally, in addition to intergroup dialogue, we do hold affinity groups where identity-based groups of people will come together in a safe space to process some of the difficult information that we may hear and that we may discuss. That's a commitment that we have to you all. And also with that, we do really focus on community building. So while the roundtables provide a space for, shared learning and action planning, there's also an intentional focus on cultivating trust and building more relationships and strategizing the practice of radical collaboration between leaders, which is an essential component of the success of any sort of systems change work. So what will you get? So we're hoping that this will exist and act as a leadership development opportunity. So we recognize that, some professional developments are effective, I think, if they have a really specific purpose. I feel like some professional developments don't help because they're too high level. So our commitment to you is that this will not be high level. This will be very specific to your leadership development and trying to grow anti-racist lens and systems change strategy. In addition, you'll also get a pretty in-depth case study about where you are in your work, in your organization or organization that you may be assisting or helping guide. You'll also get an initial racial equity capacity assessment or outcomes assessment of your institution. So you can take that lens back and think about what exactly needs to change. So baseline of where you are. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, an accountable and radically collaborative network of organizational leaders. So each organization that comes to the table is matched with either 1 or 2 accountability buddies where you would be tasked to meet with in between sessions and also to work together on some of the assignments and some of the work that you'll be doing around the table, because it is work. So what are some of the expectations about that work? You know, we're excited to host this roundtable, and we have, I think, interpreted the field of philanthropy, I think, differently than maybe some organizations might. And so I want to say that we recognize that there will be aspects of power dynamic that could be at this table, you know, where if there are funders and charities, as well as some grant writers, fund managers, and people who are on the other side of that work. And we actually do this on purpose because we think that this radical collaboration is what is going to really help cultivate change over time. And so our commitment to you is to cultivate a safe space so that regardless of who is at the table and what power position they may hold, that everybody is able to be in this space and to learn honestly and to share honestly as they continue to action plan. So our expectation is that you show up with that in mind and with that into consideration, but not make it a hindrance or hesitation to participate. Also that you're present for meetings, and if for some reason that you can't make the time commitment, that you assign a person that has the organizational authority to participate fully and to make decisions on behalf of your work. Is there anything else, Rachel, that you'd like to share about your expectations for participation?
Yeah, you know, I think when I reflect on institutions across St. Louis, we often operate in silos, taking direction from our trustees or, you know, some trusted advisors. And, you know, we know that there's, as Fabra said, a lot of power dynamics mixed up, not just with funders and with grant makers, or I'm sorry, with nonprofit organizations, but also in the funding community. And so I think along with this idea of, you know, having a culture of trying our radical collaboration, that we, you know, come into the conversations or come into this work with a little bit of vulnerability and a little bit of a growth mindset, and sort of create a space to have conversations with our peers that like we really may not have had before, explore the history of our organization in a way that we haven't put resources towards before. And I think when we do that, when we are able to bring not just our institutions, but like our individual lived experience into these conversations, they wind up being so much more rich and transformational than we could have guessed. I think that's what I would add, Fabra.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. Next, Russell talked to us a little bit about the application process and how to apply.
You can go to the next slide. So generally with the application, we'll first go through a high-level overview, and then I'll share my screen afterwards. And I'm currently dropping the link in the chat for the application if you would like to view it there as well. So within the application, each organization will be in teams of 2 to 3 people. The application is due March 26th. And then with membership fees, those will be on a sliding scale. A lot of the application that I will go through right now will be from sharing my screen, and then we'll kind of get into some of the relevant dates and anything else we need to cover. 2 seconds to share my screen. Here we go. Is everybody able to view my screen? Okay. So looking at the application itself, this is what you'll get from going to the link. The link is bit.ly/philanthropy 2022. Applications for the roundtable are going to be for the period from July 2022 to April 2023. And again, I'm just repeating the deadline, which will be March 25th. Generally for the application, you'll have a lot of background into Forward through Ferguson. Some of this we've already gone through, but I did want to highlight the 2039 action strategies and core principles as well, which you'll be more familiar with throughout the course of the roundtable. The purpose of the roundtable is to grow equity leadership, promote problem solving, enable accountability, and foster community throughout the St. Louis region. For the roundtable overview and history, you'll hear a little bit more of that throughout as well. The roundtable has a very rich history, and so a lot of credit to the past roundtable facilitators. Faber had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and also through the iterations of the roundtable. We're currently doing a parallel cross sector cohort in addition to the philanthropy roundtable for this period. Key components of the roundtable have been covered, but that includes the case study, resource generation and sharing of resources and toolkits for racial equity, and again, community building at the center. To be eligible, this includes, again, those 2 to 3 members having a commitment to being at the roundtable and being present. We ask that at least one of those members be a member of institutional leadership or someone who is able to advance racial equity policies within the organization. You'll be more familiar with our 2039 action plan, and then also the goals of Forward through Ferguson in executing the mandates from the Ferguson Commission. This includes requirements for those teams in terms of what the commitment will involve. And again, just facilitating collaborative partnerships both within your organization and outside your organization throughout the process. For the application timeline, just noting that the application is currently live, again, through March 25th. This also includes when the cohorts will be selected, when you need to sign and submit the deposits, and then the initial meeting will be July 22nd to kick off the cohort, and this will list all of the session dates. Fees for the roundtable, again, on a sliding scale. If you need additional support for the roundtable, you can contact operations at forwardthroughferguson.org. And then kind of moving towards the application submissions, you'll again use the link that I shared. And then this link at the bottom will link you to a Survey Monkey, which you'll fill out with all of your institution's information, answer the questionnaire questions, and submit your application before the deadline. Again, there'll also be questions towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions left over, you can open that up for the Q&A session or save them for then, and I will pass it back over to Faber.
Thank you, Russell. So before we go into Q&A, we just want to share a couple testimonials from participants from the past. And also, we actually have 2 people from the past roundtables who are here to talk just a little bit about their experiences and how the work has helped them. So I'll give them a second to get ready, and if the co-hosts can bring them, pin them into the space, that would be awesome. This participant said that the information and feedback provided through the roundtable has been pivotal in moving their work forward towards a racial equity policy, which is what we love to hear, because policy and systems are our biggest goal and focus area. We have more testimonials too, but I think it would be really powerful to actually hear from the 2 folks who have actually been in this space. So I'll invite Claire and Josina to come into the space. So I'll bring you here, Josina, and I'll also bring Claire into the space too. Welcome.
Hey. Thank you.
Josina, how are you? Would you like to start?
Sure, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josina Green. I work or am the giving strategist here at the St. Louis Community Foundation. And our mission is to inspire purposeful philanthropy that connects community and donors to build and preserve a more equitable and vibrant region now and forever. And so that's just, just kind of a snapshot of what we do, but we do help families, individuals, and businesses with their philanthropy. And we also kind of act as a neutral space to pull funds for, for issues that, impact our region. And so we recently, I won't say recently, but 2019, we did just update our mission to include equity. And we also adopted new values that included equity and inclusion. And we were just, I think all of us have done work in the equity space or has an equity focus, but we were having an issue of just really trying to create a sustainable, streamlined, just informed system and how we, apply that to our internal processes and operations as well as our external operations. So we actually were a little bit different and unique because we took advantage of, we signed with Ford through Ferguson to do their racial equity capacity assessment, and we did the roundtable all at the same time. So it was very informative to do those in tandem. And then also we wanted to make sure, because there have been times where, there's been like this small group, like, hey, they're doing that equity thing over there. And, they report back to the group. We felt that it was very important as a team, because it was three of us that participated in the roundtable, to bring our staff and team along. And so we met monthly with the roundtable, but we also, the frameworks that were shared, the readings that were shared, the lessons were shared, we would come back and have monthly staff meetings and basically regurgitated everything that Faber and her team were teaching us, and just really getting buy-in and feedback. And we were able to do that the entire process of the roundtable. And it was extremely helpful because at the end of it, our staff and team, and especially executive leadership as well, had buy-in on the case study that we came up with. They had input for the racial equity action plan that you end up leaving with. And we just realized going through the roundtable that there was a lot of internal work and organization that we needed to do before we even really tried to really implement it or apply what we had learned to our external processes. And so since then, we have all of our staff, we have staff of 18, everybody has participated in the Crossroads 2.5-day analyzing and understanding systemic racism. We included internal racial equity work in our operating budgets for 2020 and 21, and also for 2022. We formally adopted the Racial Equity Action Plan in May of 2021, which that framework and outline is provided for you during the roundtable. Let me see, we also have a Racial Equity Oversight Committee, which is comprised of 6 staff members from each department or team with the foundation. We've also participated in a couple of cohorts. One is with the Community Wealth Partners Community Foundations Equity Roundtable. And the other is, so the Community Foundation was one of 20 community foundations that was selected by Facebook for the Black Communities Initiative. And out of those 20 community foundations, each one was given $1 million. For ours, we had the $1 million, and then we also added $500,000 from our regional response fund, and then another $25K was provided by Boniface. And that amount of money was actually awarded to, it was for Black-led nonprofits serving Black communities. And through that grant process, 82 nonprofits were awarded. And then also to complement that initiative, they partnered with ABFI, which is the Association or a Philanthropic Partnership for Black Communities. And they're providing a customized philanthropy-focused racial equity training for select community foundations, in St. Louis was one of them that was chosen. And because we've done this work for maybe about 3 years, just consistent, the purpose of that customized training is for us to leave with more actionable implementation steps. And so I just say that it has definitely, just for any nonprofit organization, just my takeaways, if you do choose to do this, which I do, Ford through Ferguson, I mean, they are the equity and system change experts, and they're recognized locally and nationally. You leave with amazing tools and resources. It's an opportunity to really work alongside your peers in this field. And I know Rachel was mentioning silos before, but all of us are doing this work. But it's really interesting and impactful when you're doing it with peers experiencing at the same time. Like, sometimes you just have that feeling that, you take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back and 2 steps forward, and just really having that, just having those allies with you just go through it, because you'll maintain these relationships if you don't already know each other. But if you don't, you'll have relationships leaving this. I would suggest that when you do go through this, to be honest and transparent about where you really are. I mean, I know sometimes, when we lift the veil of the organization, like we just, you might not want to be completely, but in order for it to really work and be a benefit to you, it's really, because I mean, we're all in different places. I mean, some people might be a little bit further along, some might be a little bit further back, and that's fine. But just be honest and transparent about where your organization truly sits in this space. I would suggest to please determine beforehand who's going to own the work, because I think that there's so much value in the things that are shared that you don't want it to just kind of sit on the shelf somewhere. I mean, you want to make sure that there either is a team or somebody that's going to keep the work elevated in your organization. And this is like, not saying a starting point, and I'm not even sure if there's ever an arrival point for this work, but it's an ongoing, progression along the path towards racial equity. And let me see if there's anything else.
No,
is that good? We're good?
yes.
All
Thank
right,
you so
cool.
much. Thank you so much, Christina. I want to invite Claire to share as well.
Sure. Thanks, Fabric. Can you hear me okay? All right. So hello, everyone. I'm Claire Schell. I lead the Employee Experience and DEI team at U.S. Bancorp Community Development Corporation. I've been there for just about 7 years, and our work around racial equity has really been in place, I would say, probably closer to 6. And I've been a fangirl of Ford through Ferguson for some time. We got to engage with them through some regional collaboration with Crossroads and City Garden Montessori School. I was also able to participate with Fabra in that pilot roundtable. So I got the chance with one of my colleagues to participate in the updated version in 2020. And I would say, because we really did have that strong commitment in place, we thought really hard about like what we wanted to get out of the experience in particular. And one of the things was that our team was structured in such a way that our internally focused racial equity work and our external racial equity agenda really was operating kind of separately, with me leading our employee experience team and internal strategy, and then my colleague Neil Richardson, who some of you may know now at SLDC, he was leading the business impact group. And so this experience for us as colleagues really gave us the push I think we needed to spend more regular time together, getting on the same page, practicing our own storytelling about the connections across our work. That the case study that was mentioned was so helpful in that, in like really thinking through the history of our organization's work in this space and getting clearer about what the progress had been and hadn't been, and then deepening our relationships with each other and committing to some shared work together, which was really exciting. We've done some great things since then, some of which we baked into that action plan. Part of it was that we were going through strategic planning during that time, so we've been able to further integrate racial equity into our strategic plan. We have elevated the work in that we just hired a new senior leadership team member reporting to our CEO, who is overseeing both the internal and the external racial equity work. We've done a lot of great things around data. So we developed our first ever goals around workforce representation and have really increased internal transparency around our data. And then following the lead of this great team, continuing to do a lot of capacity building work. So people leadership, skill building, regular meeting practices around surfacing those wide institutional values, which I felt like we got a lot of practice around in this cohort. So I would highly recommend it. I think, as has been named, the collaboration needed for this work looks really different than the kind of collaboration we're used to in our culture and in the city of St. Louis. And so this cross-organizational framework is so helpful. We were paired with Integrated Health Network, had a really amazing experience working with the two of them. I would also just say, I would underline that point too, again, about transparency. You know, I use the definition that I think, Faber, you taught me of: accountability is the combination of pressure and support. I use that all the time, but I think that like having those accountability partners in place really does rely on us being transparent and vulnerable. And so it helps us build that practice of transparency into our day-to-day. And of course, the relationships, the new perspectives, having that external view on your work, so helpful. And really not shortcutting the individual and personal work, which is happening all the time simultaneously with our organizational work. And I think the Roundtable gave us a great platform to do both of those side by side. So highly recommend. Happy to answer any other questions about the experience.
Thank you so much, Claire. And thank you so much, Josina. Just thank you so much for coming into the space and for all the work that you're doing and for continuing to be leaders and thought partners in racial equity in your organizations and just also in town. So I know that we're a little bit over time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I did put my contact information in the chat if you cannot stay to ask your questions. So just for now, I will say thank you to the folks who are watching the recording. If you have questions, please see our contact information on the website and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching. Let me stop the recording.